Welcome back to another episode of The Founder, a show that features entrepreneurs and their early stories of ingenuity, struggle, and perseverance to get their companies off the ground. We do our best to capture the uncensored, uncovered look behind the curtain into what founders really face when getting started. I'm your host, Kallaway. Our founder guest on today's episode said he always knew he wanted to be an entrepreneur, but when he graduated from college in 2007, he didn't know exactly where to look. With his sights set on the entertainment industry, he beelined for LA and found himself working at William Morris Endeavor, one of the biggest talent agencies in the world. He started in the mailroom and ultimately worked as an assistant to several agents, building an unparalleled Rolodex of Hollywood connections. In addition to the entertainment space, he had a strong interest in technology and spent his weekends flying up to Silicon Valley to take meetings with founders, VCs, angel investors, and anyone else he could find. Over time, he realized there was a glaring gap between the talent and personalities in the entertainment industry and the tech companies that wanted to partner with that talent to promote their startups. The sides didn't know how to talk to each other. He ultimately left WME to capitalize on that market opportunity and provided business development and strategy for early to late stage startups on how to interface with the entertainment industry. That was an early version of the company he runs today, Kombo Ventures. Today at Kombo, this founder and his team have broadened their focus beyond just entertainment strategy. First, they operate as a brand studio, launching and scaling 3 beauty brands with influencer co-founders. Those brands include Glamnetic, the world's leading magnetic liner and lash company launched with Anne McFerrin, Wakeheart, a fragrance, scent, and personal care brand launched with the Dolan twins, and Insert Name Here, a hair extension and wig company launched with Shannon Pock and Jordan Wynn. In addition to the brand studio, they also run a talent management arm representing some of the biggest YouTubers in the world, as well as a digital agency. They also have a venture arm that's invested in 13 companies including DraftKings, Clutter, Whistle, Step, 10,000, and more. As a special offer, this founder is giving our listeners 15% off all products from any of the 3 Kombo beauty brands, Glamnetic, Wakeheart, and Insert Name Here. Just use code Kallaway at checkout to get the discount. This was an inspiring interview that shed light on the talent and entertainment industries and showcased how grit and hustle can turn into momentum really quickly. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. Without further ado, the founder of Kombo Ventures, Kevin Gould. Let's get it. Kevin, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
I'm really looking forward to it. So what I like to do on these episodes is before we kind of dive into your background and how you grew your business, I like to start out with an anchor point. So if you could you kind of give an anchor point to Kombo Ventures, which is kind of your umbrella company, and then each of the sub-brands that you operate underneath and kind of how that works, what's your mission, vision, products they sell, those types of things?
Yeah, sure. So on one side of the Kombo business sits sort of a traditional service-based business. So we manage digital talent, a lot of times large YouTubers and other digital talent. And then we have a digital strategy division where we work with a lot of late stage startups to Fortune 100 brands on their digital strategy. We do things like influencer, strategy, influencer buying. And then a few years ago, I really sort of saw the rise of influencers and sort of the power that they had for commerce, wanted to start building my own brands. And so a little under 2 years ago now, launched my first brand, which was Insert Name Here. And then sort of last year in 2019, launched Wakeheart and Glamnetic. And so now I'm, thankful to call myself the co-founder of 3 pretty fast growing direct to consumer brands and excited to get into that and talk a little bit more about it.
Yeah, it's incredible. For the people listening, Insert Name Here, and you'll hear this in the intro, but Insert Name Here, focus on hair extensions mostly. And then Wakeheart's kind of a fragrance brand, and Glamnetic is focused more on like magnetic eyeliner lashes, right? Is that a fair?
Yeah, that's totally fair.
Cool. So after the anchor, what I love to do is kind of rewind the clock a bit and talk through your life and background, just how you got kind of where you are today and started working on Kombo and these brands. So I'd love for you to, as fast or slow as you'd like, kind of take us through that path.
Yeah, sure. So I guess if you rewind a little bit, I grew up most of my life in North Carolina. I went to college out there. I went to UNC Wilmington, which is like Wilmington's an awesome beach town in North Carolina. Studied business. I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur, but at the time, I graduated at the end of 2007, and I didn't really know where to look. And I knew I wanted to be in the entertainment business, and I didn't know where to go other than I thought LA was a great place to be. And so I graduated a semester early from college at the end of '07 and sort of drove out to LA. I made my way out to California, got here, really didn't know too many people, had a bunch of odd jobs for a while. And then I ended up landing a gig in the mailroom at William Morris Endeavor, which is, for those who don't know, it's a really big talent agency that represents, at the time, it was mostly representing actors, writers, directors, producers. That was sort of like the core of the business. And so the way you sort of work your way up the agency is you literally start in the mailroom. And at the time, it was like right around when like iPads were still starting to become popular. So a lot of actors actually still read like hard copy scripts. So you literally had to like print the scripts, deliver it to actors' houses. I mean, basically do anything that the agents wanted. And then you kind of work your way up to be an assistant. And so you work as an assistant to a specific agent and basically handle everything for them, right? Like you're like their right hand and running anything that they need on a day-to-day basis and working with their clients. And so at the time, I was working with a lot of like young Hollywood talent of 10 years ago. So it was like the Twilight Kids, Glee, One Tree Hill. It was the influencers before like influencers really came to be.
Not a bad crew.
Yeah, it was a great experience. And one of the things you gain from working at those one of the big agencies is you gain a Rolodex of relationships that would be really hard to get anywhere else, and just like a crash course in everything in the entertainment business. But what I was doing on the side was I had a real curiosity for the tech industry. And so I started reading like TechCrunch and all these other tech blogs at the time. And I was like, you know what? I want to meet some people in the space. So during the weekdays, I'd cold email people up in Silicon Valley. They were either founders or VCs or just entrepreneurs or angel investors. And I was like, look, I work at WME. I think I can add some value for you on the entertainment side. Would love to meet you. So then on Friday nights, I'd hop a flight up to Silicon Valley and take meetings Saturdays and Sundays. And I started to realize that there was a real gap where everyone in Silicon Valley was interested in working in the entertainment side and vice versa, but no one knew how to talk to each other. And so at the time, WME had a one-person digital department. Now there's, 50 people there. So I didn't really see much of an opportunity there, but I saw an opportunity to leave and start something on my own. And so I ended up leaving with one other person at the time at WME, and we essentially launched what ended up becoming a version of Kombo, where at the time I was essentially doing biz dev and strategy for early to late stage startups, and really being the connector on the entertainment side. And the business model was I'd take a retainer, I'd take sweat equity that I'd have to earn. And then I realized really early on the companies I was working with were really hard to get into as an investor. And so then I was like, you know what? I should start negotiating to like squeeze into these rounds that are really hard to get into. I was kind of crazy with my money, so I took all my money on consulting other than paying rent and just started dumping it back into angel investing. And that was kind of like the first stage. And then along the way, I was lucky to kind of get really operational with a few companies that I was invested in. And so that's kind of where I gained the ops experience. And a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, kind of jumped back on the influencer side and on the management side when I saw that sort of like really taking off. Sort of launched the management division of Kombo. Have had the pleasure of working with a lot of really big YouTube and digital talent along the way, which then sort of took me to 2 years ago on the brand side when I decided to launch these brands. So that's a try to condense it into a couple minutes, but
yeah, what a ride though.
Yeah, it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, it sounds like it was compounding, over time. Like I feel like you probably do these conversations all the time, and you boil down 12 years of hard work into like 30 seconds, and it seems like it was such a fast rise, but I'm sure it was like compounding over time.
100%, man. It was like I just feel like every year just like compounds on the past year, and it's been a lot of hard work. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm really thankful and fortunate to kind of be in the spot I am today.
Yeah. My day job's in consulting, so I get the model, of the project-based or outcome-based where you go to those companies and for 4 to 8 or whatever weeks, and it sounds like you were on retainer. I'm curious, when you were framing the offering early on with your friend that you kind of started the boutique consultancy with, what was the offer that you were going to startups with early on? And like, how hard or easy was it to get in the door? Because I find startups are so cash strapped, right? To get on a retainer with a company of 5 to 10 people would be pretty tough. So walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah, it was really interesting. And I think, at the time I was an assistant, and an assistant WME, you're not getting paid much money. So any consulting money And I didn't come from money. So any consulting money is better than the salary you're getting paid as an assistant in an agency at the time. And so there wasn't much of a bar to pass if you picked up a couple clients. But what I did find was that, and this sort of like proved itself out as I was taking all these meetings over the course of months when I'd fly up to Silicon Valley. I saw that there was a real need there where all of these companies, that particularly ones that were consumer facing, obviously wanted to be plugged into the entertainment business, and like couldn't figure out how to either like get to the celebrity that they wanted to like partner with their brand, or like one company, I got them on like the Ellen show super early on. At the time, it was like the first app ever that was on like the 12 days of Christmas for them, and like things that they could not do because they just didn't know how to navigate the entertainment business. So it was actually, and the influencer piece was a big piece of it, because we were booking at the time. We were like one of the, I feel like the first companies to really book YouTubers, and we were doing like $500 deals, $1,000 deals.
Yeah.
These companies, these startups obviously didn't have a lot of capital. So if they could do a deal with an influencer and pay him $1,000 and see a return on it, they do that all day because they were priced out of working with any, traditional celebrities.
Totally. When you would work with them, would they come to you with like a pretty finite vision of what they wanted? Like, hey, we'd love to get in touch with these three people, like make it happen. Or was it more, broad strategic, right? Like they would say like, we want you to run our influencer marketing piece, figure out like how to make it work for us.
It was a little bit of both. Everyone would be like, I want to partner with The Rock. I'm like, well, what? Everyone wants to partner with The Rock. Let's get like realistic on, a realistic partnership with someone that makes sense and like actually will drive your business forward. So it was really like us working together closely to figure out what the right fit was. And then on like the influencer side, this was where there weren't that many like agencies that were doing a lot of influencer work at the time. So it was not nearly as structured as it is now. There's a million agencies now that, all have influencer arms and, do the whole influencer thing. And so it was a lot of like trial and error in the beginning. This was, 8, 9, 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get into. So in the like equation, it makes sense on the brand side, like they need this and you're the middleman. If you look at the talent, I'm really fascinated to learn about like how that talent management interaction goes. And I'm sure it evolved early on. Influencers didn't really know what they wanted or could get, but now influencers have so much power. When you work with an influencer, do they come to you and say, hey, I would love to work with these 5 brands. Like, is there a fit? Make it happen. Or again, is it just you kind of actively searching for organic connections and then trying to plug them in certain places?
I think it really depends on the influencer and where they're at in their career, right? So like if if it's an influencer that's sort of like coming up, they haven't really hit mainstream, I'd put the Dolans in like the macro level, big influencers, right? And they're in a totally different, state in their career than someone that's sort of coming up. And so, I think when they're building their career, they're looking at like, how can I continue to build my audience and like build my community? But I think when you get to the larger influencers, use this phrase called like LEO. So this acronym LEO. So basically when you're like a larger influencer, even a celebrity for that matter, you look at your business as like, do I license, do I endorse, or do I own, right? And you figure out what path you want to go down based on the category that you're in, right? So like if it's a soft drink, it's probably better for you to like do an endorsement deal with Coca-Cola or Pepsi. Chances are you're probably not building your own soda, right? But maybe it's like a poster company, right? A poster company wants to go to you and do a license deal, and they have distribution in all targets. You throw that in the licensing category, right? Because you're never going to get a big endorsement deal from a poster company, and you're never going to own a poster company, right? So you put in the licensing bucket, and then you look at, okay, I want to go down the path and really like build 1, maybe 2 brands that I actually want to own, the entire thing, or a stake of, or something that's a little bit more
like Ray J's earbuds, like that kind of thing, like Raycon.
Yeah, or like something that you have like some degree of ownership in that's above just like a standard royalty you're making on a licensing deal. And I sort of encourage all influencers or any celebrity I talk to as well to sort of look at their business in that lens and think about the way they're placing these opportunities in those different buckets.
Do you find that when influencers come to you, that everybody wants to monetize and they have ideas, but their strategic like business approach is less organized, and when they partner with someone like you, it makes a world of difference? Or are they already kind of thinking about this, pretty well, and they're just missing a little like grease or some connections to close the deals?
I think there's really only 50 to 100 influencers in the entire world that you can actually build a real large brand with. And when I mean like when I mean a large brand, like it's easy to work, for an influencer to get to 1 million or 2 million in sales. It's really hard to take it to like an 8 figure, a 9 figure business. I think on one end you have like the anomalies, like the Kylies and the Rihannas, and some of these people that have built enormous businesses. But there's realistically like only 50 to 100 people that I personally think can build a massive brand and jumpstart a brand. And I think for any influencer that's building a brand, I always encourage them to think about, you know, you can be the like the kickstart and like the initial distribution, but it needs to be bigger than you, and then in 24 months down the line, right? Like a brand other than like the exceptions for like a Kylie, it's really hard to have it just based on one person.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And that's a good segue into, so kind of walking through the path, the digital agency, the talent management, and now I'd love to get into the brand piece. So just to start, like a couple of years ago, you said I want to own some of my own brands and be a co-founder in those. What was the mentality or the logic there? Like, what were you thinking about, and why did you trigger that decision?
So, again, I was kind of lucky along the way to get some operational experience with and go really deep with a few of the companies I was consulting for. And so I really sort of got dug in and felt like I had a pretty good operational background with the companies I was involved with. And then separately, because of like everything that was going on the influencer side, I thought I had a pretty unique value proposition that if I were a brand, I could plug and play a lot of my influence relationships into those brands. And then I was separately seeing like the scale that influencers were driving, whether it be through their merch business or like just, other things that they were doing. And I thought there was a pretty unique competitive advantage there. And so obviously it's easier said than done to say, hey, I want to start a brand. So I said, okay, well, where do I want to start? And like who do I want to partner with? Because I do want to partner, on these brands. The reality is I have a whole other service-based business that's, doing pretty well. And so that sort of started the journey of like, okay, what's the first brand I want to build? And so I knew Jordan Wynn and Sharon Pak, who are my co-founders on Insert Name Here. They were the first two employees at ColourPop Cosmetics and basically like built the marketing from the ground up. And I had known them 4 or 5 years. So I actually like slid in their DMs one day and I was like, hey, like, let's link up. I want to hear what you guys are up to. And, we met up, we started talking about just different ideas and like where we saw gaps in the market. And, we all had sort of a beauty background, them a little bit more so than me, but when we started looking at the beauty space, color cosmetics was really tapped and saturated. Everyone had their own makeup brand, but then we started looking at hair and thought the hair business, really, a lot of the brands in the space just weren't that strong in our opinion at creative, community building, social influencers, sort of like the sweet spot of what we're really good at from a marketing perspective. And so cut to, I found a really amazing woman who's worked on our product development since the beginning. Her, myself, and Sharon, after we had the conversation, I think Sharon and I, we sat down, let's call it June of 2018. And we launched the brand in October of, 2018.
That's crazy. That's so fast.
Yeah, when we, the whole through line with both Insert Name Here and as well as with Waycard and Glamnetic, completely self-funded. We set goals with each of my co-founders of we need to get these businesses profitable within 6 months or less. I just don't think you need that much capital to start a consumer brand today, and you should be really scrappy and lean when you start out and like actually prove out that you can produce a high quality product, build a community, get a little bit of traction, and like, yeah, maybe you need a little bit of friends and family capital, but I'm not a big believer in having to go raise massive amounts of capital to build out consumer brands today.
So what did that first, like tactically, that first 6 months of each of those businesses, what were some of the steps that you took to expedite that process and avoid some of the pitfalls that some of these brands find themselves in their first year?
Yeah, it's interesting. We did a little bit of research on the space. We did a little bit of just like competitive analysis, looking at what's out there. But then, for Sharon and Jordan, they're really amazing, I think, at like trend spotting when it comes to what's on trend or like what's coming up on trend, particularly in the beauty space. And so I think we sort of all relied instinctually a little bit on what we thought would work when we launched. I think we were a little naive in the beginning, and that in the hair space in particular, it's kind of like shoes, right? Like you need lots of different sizes in shoes to make it work. So you need, if you're missing 7, 8, 9s and 11s, probably not going to hook that many customers. Well, it's the same in hair, right? Like we launched with 4 or 5 hair colors, for a couple of our different shades. And like, that's not the best for conversion when you kind of only have 4 or 5 different colors at the time. So it was sort of like us having to just continue to build along the way. But I think we moved really quick. We launched a minimum viable product. We kind of kept the quantities down as much as we could on the ordering side. And then we just tested on the marketing side to see what worked, what didn't work, and then sort of built and, iterated from there.
And did you funnel pretty hard to your like influencer networks that you thought would work early on? Or you kind of tested quietly and then once it was ready, just unleashed?
Yeah. In the beginning, I mean, we were lucky to all have, like, all three of us had a lot of relationships in the influencer space. So we plugged in to a lot of the influencers that we knew, but also we went after an entire network of people that we didn't know as well. And obviously now, cut to now, we've got a whole team that does influencer partnerships and influencer gifting. But in the beginning, it was like very scrappy, and it was, me DMing them or texting them, or Sharon and Jordan doing the same thing. And so in the beginning, you kind of have to wear a lot of hats in the company.
Talk about the way the company and the team is structured. So you were saying, before we started recording, you're like the operating partner, essentially. I'm sure you have a team under you that's helping like run ops on these businesses. Are your partners that you partner with in each business, are they effectively like the CEOs and the product direction, or are you very closely collaborating with them on each business?
Yeah, I'd say I'm really thankful and fortunate to have amazing partners. So like on Insert Name Here, Sharon and Jordan are really day to day and run everything from like creative, content, social, a lot on the influencer team. I'm pretty involved on the influencer side, but like they're really, leading the charge in the day to day. And, Insert Name Here is its own whole team. We have an amazing team of everything when it comes to social and content and, all that stuff. Same with Glamnetic, and then same with Waycard. So the teams are really, their own individual teams. And then, I'm there on the ops side with my team. I have my right hand guy Lucas with me on everything, who's awesome, and that's sort of like the structure and how it's set up. And again, we've been fortunate we've self-funded all of them. We haven't raised any capital, and so we've ran everything lean.
I imagine the toughest thing for you is like prioritization, like balancing your time, because you're being pulled in so many different directions. How do you do that, right? How do you choose, on the services side, which I imagine you're working with bigger, potentially Fortune 100 companies, you might have to be the person in the room selling them on certain consulting services engagements. And then on the startup side, right, every, mistake or hiccup early on is exponentially impactful. So like it's very important for your time there as well. How do you think about time management across everything?
Totally. Well, I think one thing, I think focus is an underrated trait. Like I think particularly when you're building startups, you have to be hyper focused on them. And so one thing we're not doing is I'm not building any new startups anytime soon. Like I kind of picked my 3 things I'm working on the brand side, and then that's it. And now we're focused on scaling those. But when it comes to sort of distributing the time, I think that goes back to, we were fortunate to I have great co-founders on each of the businesses. And then on Kombo, I have an amazing team that really does like an excellent job on the management side and sort of the strategy side of the business. And so, yeah, I do come in on a lot of like the bigger conversations, or when we're thinking through strategy. But I'm thankful to have like an awesome team on that side of the business as well.
Yeah. A thing that I've heard from a lot of founders is when they give people advice to start, when they're starting companies, like make sure you're like in love with the product, obsessed with the product, potentially even a user of the product. And in a question I imagine them asking you is, 2 of the 3 brands that you've launched, you don't really even use the product. So, what would your response be to those people? Like, how did you think through that?
Yeah, totally. So it's interesting. I'm a really big fan of just like, what I love about it is, you're right, I don't wear hair.
Except for Halloween, maybe.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe I was Jon Snow last Halloween, so I actually did have on a wig. But, I love just the community building aspect. And even though I'm not necessarily a part of that community, and I think like Anne on Glamnetic or Sharon and Jordan on Insert Name Here, they're in it day to day with like the community and the audience. I really love being part of something that's like building community. And I feel like I am, even though I don't use the product, I do feel like super in touch with, like the community aspect of it. And it's funny, even on Waycard, we launched with fragrance, and like we actually thankfully have something coming up in a month from now that it's a new product category in scent that not going to say what it is yet, but it's the first product I'm actually going to be able to use, because I'm allergic to fragrance. So
okay.
even with that, It was this will literally be the first product I've launched in the last 2 years that I can actually use.
That's hilarious. You're like, guys, we got to get some on the roadmap that I can use.
Oh,
Or,
yeah, I'll hook you up. I'm going to send you something when we have it come out. But I think that on the influencer side of things too, like again, like I was really plugged into that space, and the influencer ecosystem really lends itself well to beauty and beauty adjacent businesses. And so I sort of had an opportunity and a unique lens on it where I sort of knew what worked with the influencers and what works on the brand side with them. And so again, even though I'm not using the product, thankfully I can rely on my co-founders for all of that, but I am pretty plugged in to the business.
yeah, less of a product fit for you, more of like a utility, like community fit.
Yeah, I love the community, man. You can always tell how much of a community a brand's built by going to their Instagram and looking at the tagged photos. So like if you go to all like any of the brands I'm involved in and you look at our tagged photos, there's thousands of customers tagging the brand, and there's like a real affinity for the brand, and that's just really fun for me to see because it started as an idea with, a blank piece of paper to where it's at today. And I think we still have a really long way to go. And I think everything's still in its infancy, but it's fun to kind of see the progression over time.
Totally. I mean, it's crazy how far you've come in just 2 years or less with these brands. I'm curious, when you think about the kind of first 12 months, which of the three was the least like smooth? And, what was different about that one than the others?
They all have their things, man. They're like, there's no easy path. And so a certain brand may be a little bit more challenging logistically with supply chain and with inventory, and obviously with COVID and everything that's happened, there's been so many disruptions in the supply chain. But like early on, I think they all have, slightly different challenges. I think if you look at like Waycart, right, our thing from the beginning was like, we want to make this bigger than just the Dolan twins, right? And so really creating that separation in the beginning where they were pushing the brand, but it wasn't just about them, right? It's not like the Dolan's merch company, Waycart. Waycart is a standalone brand, and they are my partners and my co-founders on it, and they've been amazing to be partners with, and so that's always something we're thinking about long term. And look, in the lash business with Glamnetic, lashes, there's lots of lash brands, right? And so standing out in a competitive market is super hard. With hair, with insert name here, it's an incredibly hard market to break into, right? There's like a moat in the hair business. If you really look at the hair space, there haven't been that many brands that have launched the last couple of years for multiple reasons. The supply chain's super complex. It's just really hard to break in. And so they all have their different, challenges, and they're all fun to kind of figure out.
I'm curious to get your perspective on the influencer like market or industry as a whole. So I feel like as an outsider looking in, not that it's totally saturated, but it's getting to the point where there's so many, like you said, 50 to 100, like mega macro, and there's a lot of micro and there's a lot in the middle right now. Where do you think the influencer space is going in the next 5 to 10 years, right? How will those people who haven't secured a moat around their huge following break out over time?
Yeah, they might not. But that's like with anything, right? Like I think you have to have a point of differentiation. There's a lot of influencers that can still make a really great living just doing brand deals, and there's nothing necessarily wrong with that, right? Like I think for a lot of influencers, if they get to enough scale, that'll always be there for them. But I think for the ones that stand out, they really have something differentiated, whether that be the way they deliver their content and or something that they're doing that just makes them stand out. Like that's what's going to hold up long term, and really having a sticky community built with the audience they're retaining. I think it's a lot harder for someone that's just on Instagram to do it than on YouTube. I think if you can build a YouTube audience that keeps coming back for long form content that you put out, you have a much longer shelf life than if you're just relying on Instagram. And I think like a lot of influencers are always trying to figure out how they cross over between the different platforms, but the platforms are completely different. Like you have to treat them a lot differently, and building on Instagram is a lot different than building on YouTube, and vice versa.
For people that don't know the magnitude of these types of brand deals and like really what goes on, like can you walk through, without sharing any
Sure.
confidential stuff, walk through like how that works and how big these things are and what people typically get?
Sure. So let's like break down a big YouTuber, right? And let's just take a YouTuber that has I'm just going to make up a metric here, but let's say they have 15 million subscribers on YouTube, okay? And let's say they do 200 million views a month on YouTube, which is a pretty good number. That's like kind of like a solid number for someone that's got 15 million followers just on their YouTube AdSense, which is the money that YouTube pays them to run the pre-rolls and the mid-rolls, right? And they're taking a split with YouTube. Someone like that's probably making 250 to 500K a month just on the AdSense, right? Then you look at like the next bucket, which is brand deals. And again, this is someone that's, got 15 million subs that has pretty consistent views. They're probably making anywhere for an integration on the low end into their channel, 30, 40K for an integration, all the way up to maybe 200 for like a dedicated video on their channel if the viewership is there. So that's sort of like the brand bucket. Someone that big also probably has a pretty solid merch business. They're probably making another, $1 million a year on their merch business net to them. Merch is a commoditized business. So like, I would never suggest having an influencer build their own merch business. There's a few really great merch partners out there that you can go, partner with, and you retain as an influencer a really big cut of the revenue. And so when you look at just those three things, not anything you're even building for yourself as a brand, you're in the $5, $6, $7 million range a year in revenue. That's on YouTube. But if you look at an Instagrammer that's got 15 million followers that doesn't have a YouTube audience, it's much lower, right? You're probably in like the $1 million to $2 million range. They just don't have as many ways to monetize.
Where do you think the YouTube play gets saturated with? So it's tough from the outside without all the metrics, but there's the increase in audience and viewership is going up, and then the number of YouTubers going up. It's tough to know like if the slope of which line is increasing faster, but what's your take on where we're at right now with that? Like if someone were to start a channel right now and find a good niche, do you still think that they could achieve some sort of financial success, or is it just a slog at this point?
I mean, look, it's a slog. More people are going to fail than they're going to succeed. But again, that's like life. And so the ones that like really put in the time, they come with like compelling content. They come with a point of view. They have something that's differentiated. They totally can make it. And if the niche is big enough, you can do really well in a specific, niche. Like I saw someone the other day that, really rose quickly in like the finance space because they've been doing a ton of videos around how to apply for the PPP loans. And like they found this like really, interesting niche at a point in time that was like their way to break into the business and carve out a pretty interesting path in a niche category. So there's always room. It's just, it is really, it's like anything. It's really hard,
It's funny because when you think about it, as a consumer user of it, there's only so much time in the day outside of most people's like typical job. There's only so many hours they can be consuming. So it's like if they have their podcast they listen to here, their YouTube channel they watch 3 times a week, like there's only so much time for them to listen.
There's definitely cannibalization of content. And I mean, it's so tough now. You've got so many different platforms. To your point, you've got podcasts, you've got TikTok, you got Snap, you got Insta, you got YouTube, you got Netflix. You just have so much content that's available that it's becoming harder and harder to hook someone in and convince them to spend their hard-earned time, watching your content.
Have there been any radical, like what was the first radical type brand deal that kind of almost changed the game? Like whatever period we're currently in, who was the first influencer to do like a radical deal to get us here?
I think like 10 years ago, every celebrity was saying, I want my 50-cent vitamin water deal, right? Like that was like, I feel like that one really kicked it off, where that was like before Dr. Dre and Beats by Dre. Every celebrity at the time, like when I was at the agency, was like, I want my 50-cent vitamin water deal, right? There's ones that I feel like flew way under the radar that, I'm going way back. But I remember when I was like a kid, like George Foreman had like the George Foreman grill, right? Yeah. And it was, he kind of just looked like a spokesman for it, but he cut an amazing deal and he made
a shit ton of money from that.
Insane money on this thing, right? And so I think like everyone in theory wants those deals, but they're few and far between. It takes a lot to have one of those hit. And those were both done. Remember, those were more like souped up licensing deals, right? It's not like 50 Cent owned vitamin water. He owned a piece of it. And it's not like George Foreman owned that grill. He partnered with someone and put his face on it, owned a nice piece of it. But there's been very few like Beats by Dre where Dre was like super involved, or like the Kylie Cosmetics where it's Kylie did own it.
Yeah, those are unicorns, I feel like.
Those are unicorns, man. I mean, I think you look at like Bethany Frankel, she had Skinny Girl Margarita, that she was like one of the housewives in New York, and that was a great deal for her. So there's a lot of like traditional celebrity deals that sort of, kicked it off. And then you had the trend of like every celebrity wanted an alcohol, right? So then
And
Pitbull's got a
Diddy,
drink. Diddy's got obviously Diddy's done a great job. Jay-Z's got his drink. You've got a million different celebrities that have their own
The Rock
alcohol.
has a tequila.
Yeah, and by the way, I think anything The Rock does can work because he's a unicorn, right? But there's a million other celebrities that have tried to do an alcohol, and I don't think it's like stacked up to what I think their expectations were.
Yeah, I think what's interesting now is the like athlete startup investing crossover. Like Kevin Durant is, like one of the reasons he went to Golden State is so he could be exposed to that, which is
Yeah,
really good foresight on his part. And I'm, searching companies for the podcast and just seeing like angel investors like Baron Davis, like just all these athletes just popping up in the space. And I definitely want to get into that with you later around your whole like investing
yeah.
thesis and that piece. A couple more questions on the brand side, like growing businesses. Something that I like to talk about like tactically is marketing. Are there any outside the box tactics that you've tried with any of the three brands that have worked, and kind of can you share those stories?
I think it's like a sum of like all the parts that is what makes the marketing piece work. Like I think to kind of set the stage to be a brand today and like really scale the brand, you have to be really good at a lot of different things. So it's not just like working with influencers, that's a piece of it. It's not just running paid acquisition, that's a piece of it. Email, SMS, building the community, having great creative, having great social. You have to be so good at all of those different pieces to make the brand, and having high quality product to make the brand like hit. We did things in the beginning, like we were to get customers in the beginning of insert name here. We were sliding in anyone that would follow us on Instagram. We would automatically DM them and say, "Hey, let us know if you have any questions. We're here to help you." And we were hooking. It was like selling to customers via DM and being like their personal concierge. And that's what you have to do at the time to get customers. So in the very beginning, like if I were to give advice to someone that was starting a brand with very little capital, whether it be like an Etsy store and they have an Instagram account or whatever, anyone that follows you as a potential customer, you should literally DM every single one of them. Because for the first probably like 5,000 people that followed our account, we no joke DM'd every single one, right? And the conversion on that was real. And I think that also really led us to like creating that community aspect early on. But yeah, that was sort of like one of like the outside the box, like early tactics we used. Other things we've done, like we've invited fans on, Zoom hangouts with us, right? Like we've had like virtual, when like COVID hit, Glamedic had like a virtual DJ, like we had like a DJ party. It was like a virtual hang. Like we had a female DJ come in and like DJ, and then like Anne, who's my co-founder on Glamedic, came in and like had a cocktail hour hang with like a bunch of like the Glamedic fam, right? And that's like those small things that it's not necessarily like they're massive revenue drivers and like a single pop for the business. But again, it all comes back down to like building, a really amazing relationship with your consumers and like building that community, which is what builds a long-term brand.
Yeah, those add up. I feel like brands that are too out over their skis with paid acquisition, it burns you, because
100%.
like if there's a blip or you run out of money for a period, you're dead. Like you have no community to fall back on.
Yeah, you can't. I don't think you can build a brand today solely on paid acquisition. It's totally an important part of any brand's business for sure. Like you can't not do it. You do need paid acquisition. But I think that if you're just solely relying on that, kind of what goes up, right, must come down. And so if you don't have any other defensibility around your business, you sort of fall in that category of almost being like a drop shipper, which is like a race to the bottom. And so I couldn't more strongly agree with what you're saying.
Would you say that you picked up a lot of this business wisdom from school, your first period when you were doing the consulting with startups and just being exposed to so much, you're investing and like mentoring in different startups, or like actually getting your hands dirty 2 years ago and building these brands?
Sure. So I don't think I picked up much of it from school. I think that I went to college. If I was growing up today, I would not have went to college. But if I was 18 today, but when I was in college, there weren't the resources online available to learn from, all these different really amazing entrepreneurs that their content is online. And so I didn't know where else to go. So I did go to college. Look, I think I gained some things from being in school, but you can't really learn how to build a business through a textbook, right? And so for me, it was a lot of like just being in the grind of it and just being in it. I had the unique advantage of being able to like see across a lot of different companies and how they operated, different founders, seeing their styles, solving different unique business problems. And then I always think I innately was really strong at marketing since I was a kid. So that was like a strong suit of mine. But I think like it was a real benefit to be able to work with so many different startups. And then I think that, yeah, I think the biggest thing is that I'm constantly curious. I never want to stop learning. I'm constantly trying to figure out like what's the next, like how can I look at what other people are doing in other industries, not even necessarily in what we're doing. Because a lot of times I'm not taking inspiration from like competition, right? I'm taking inspiration from like just other things I'm seeing that I think are really cool, that maybe if I change a few things, we can apply it back to our own businesses.
Totally.
And so I just think being constantly curious and then just working really hard are key.
For the people out there that are like, they're hungry, they just started working, they're getting paid like kind of a shitty salary, which, at William and Morris, it's can't be much lower than that. Cause I know my friend did that and you barely get paid
Yeah.
anything. It's tough to save anything and then, parlay into investing in all of this. What would you tell people like that?
Well, I think you have to like think long term and have like your long game hat on. And again, the benefit of today is long game has actually shortened because things can just scale and you can build things much quicker and with less capital than even 10 or 12 years ago, right? So the long game has even shortened from where it is today, but you can't really shortcut putting in the work, right? So I think you actually need to stay humble, put in the work, learn a specialty, and then become a really good generalist on the side. So I think you do have to have something that you have a specialty in, whether that's like paid acquisition or whether that's you're an amazing creative director or whatever it is, and then you become a generalist on everything else. Because the reality is to run a business, to run a team, you have to be a pretty solid generalist at everything. But usually it comes from being grounded and having like one or two things you're specialized in. And so I encourage everyone that's like super young, that's coming out of college, like go work in a fast growth startup, put in the work, learn all the systems, spend a couple years there. And you don't need to start a company when you're 21. Like it's not like a requirement. I think there's like this societal pressure that like being, you got to be an entrepreneur now and you got to make it now. And
10 million by 25, like all these crazy.
It's all bullshit, man. You gotta put in the work. There's going to be a few people that are anomalies and just like kill it when they're 21 or 22. But I don't know, for me, I could not be doing what I'm doing right now at like this level if I had not put in all that work beforehand.
I totally agree. The thing you said about be a specialist but be a generalist on the side is so true. I take myself as a proxy. I'm in consulting, so I'm the generalist, but I never really had that opportunity, or I could have on the side, but in the work setting, I never really specialized, and I totally agree with that. So I think that's great advice. If you think about like, manifesting the future of Kombo and all the brands, where do you think, or where do you want them to be in 5 to 7 years? Like, where do you think they'll all be?
Sure. So I guess if you just sort of like set the stage, like, the brands I'm, co-founder on, right, last year did a couple $1,000,000 in revenue in year one, right? This year combined we'll do probably 50 to 60 million in revenue. So saw real scale happen, between last year and this year. And so the rest of this year, I think my co-founders and I, and again, they're all separate businesses, so they have slightly different, they have different goals based on the business, but I think we're all focused on continuing to double down on the community, building out unique product offerings to create defensibility around the business, bringing on the right people, because it's incredibly important to bring on the right people at the right time, as your startup, keeping like the lean mentality, but again, like scaling up the right way. So that's like the focus, I'd say, like the next year. I'm not planning on building any other brands. I just think it wouldn't be smart thing for me to do. I think like these brands require a lot of attention. I'm thankful that they're in an amazing spot. And now it's time to just like double down and scale these brands. And I think like, as I think long term about Kombo, I think there's like a really, really just interesting thing that we're building. I'm a little biased, obviously, but I think it's pretty unique to sort of have like on one end, we're working, day to day with a lot of really top, like big digital talent, and, have the privilege of like working with companies and still gaining and seeing a lot of like the insights that other companies are going through, and being able to plug our knowledge that I'm spending my real dollars on these things, and I'm recommending the companies they should do these things. A lot of agencies, are giving strategy, but they're not maybe necessarily putting their dollars into play and then giving that strategy out. So I think that business is going to continue to expand. And then, I think like there's just a really unique play between like what's happening with everything we're doing on entertainment and like what I've been doing on the brand building side that I'm excited about. And I don't want to look too far ahead, because then you take your eye off of the ball and you never know what's going to happen.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of ways it could go, right? I'm sure you've thought about this, slightly, but you could roll up the brands into a beauty conglomerate and run that forever, or you could try to, spin them off, sell one off. You could do plenty of things. I'm curious if what you're doing, I would essentially call like super incubation. So you basically took everything you knew, but then you're really, really day to day driving these businesses. Has a model like almost one level down of incubation where you provide that as a service, but really it's operating on its own with the founders, and you could maybe have 12 to 15 different businesses under the umbrella. Has something like that interested you ever?
It's interesting. I think like a couple years ago, when I was like toying with the idea of like how I wanted to build brands, it's definitely something that popped in my head. But as it went on and you actually get in the brand building side, I think it's really hard to do. For me, one, I love being super involved on the operations, and so I can't be involved in any more than three things. There's no time, and I love being involved with the team and being a part of the team and having the community build and going through it with the team. And so personally, I don't know if that right now in my life, if that makes sense. Maybe in the future, that is something that I think makes sense when there are a lot of these, it's really hard to build like the operational infrastructure. And when that's built, there's probably a more, maybe in 5 years, I might be tired from being in the day to day of like building brands, and maybe there is a world where that happens. But for me right now, this is what I feel is like the right fit for me. But it is an interesting model. It's just a completely different model. And you're at that point, you're sort of in between a VC and in between like,
an operator.
Yeah, an operator, right? And so it is unique. It is an interesting model. It's just not like what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, that model's tough because you like can't let yourself get sucked into any one brand, but like that goes against exactly what you said you love to do. So it's like it would be a constant push-pull.
Exactly.
Shifting to some of these other kind of more personal questions, love to get your take on. So the first couple are around hiring. So I've said on the show a bunch, I think hiring is the most important thing you can do. If you get superstars, buy into the vision, and just grind, your life is a million times easier and more fun. Aside from the partners that you've co-founded these with, which I think sound all great, what characteristics have you looked for in other people that you've hired in these organizations that you found consistent across the superstars?
Yeah, I think people that are like incredibly proactive, that like I personally, and I think I would probably say the same for my co-founders, I think everyone works well with people that are proactive and not reactive, right? Because in a startup, you need people to push things through, get things done, take it to the finish line, think about things you're not thinking about, think about your blind spots, add value to the company, right? Because if someone's coming into the company, in theory, they should be adding more value than if they weren't there, right? So making sure that they're incredibly proactive, making sure they're a good like cultural fit with the team, and that they're an amazing communicator. I think people need to be, that we bring in, need to be amazing listeners, because in a startup, in a fast moving startup, there's a lot going on, and you don't want to have one-way conversations. You want to have two-way constructive conversations where people are actively listening, taking that feedback, and then implementing it and putting it into play. I go back to like people that are just naturally constantly curious. I love to know like what people are interested in, or like what they're actively trying to improve on in their own life, because I feel like that kind of shows like something they're trying to learn or get better at. And I just think like life in general is about continuing to be the best version of yourself. So we want people that are actively trying to be the best version of themselves, not just the best version for the company. It's like the best version of themselves for themselves, which then will automatically trickle down to the company. I honestly don't look at college degrees on resumes that much. Like, it's not that.
I don't think it matters.
Yeah,
these
it
days.
doesn't matter. I think like I really love seeing people that, like, you know, let's say they're like a graphic designer, but then on the side they learn how to, this goes back to being a specialist, it's a generalist, right? Like, if we hire a graphic designer and they're great at graphic design, but on the side they learn how to shoot video and edit video, and maybe they know how to edit ads, and they like just did that on the side as a side project, or shot a short film on their own. I'm like, okay, wow, they're a graphic designer. They totally check the box of doing graphic design, but like, if we have something that comes up where we need extra editing help, like, I know I can plug and play that person in. And so that's also like something I look for. And then just, you know, I want to work with good people. Like, I think it's always hard to tell in an interview, right? You get to see someone for 30 minutes, but I think generally I have a pretty good sense of, you know, if I vibe with someone, if I think they're a good person, and if they're going to be a good fit for the team. And so if you're going to work with this person for the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years, however long it may be, that's super important. I think I'd say lastly, like, someone coming into a company has to be like a two-way relationship between the employee and the business. So I always want to know, what are their, like, where do they actually want to go with their goals in life, and like, how can I help them get there, right? In turn, they need to perform for the company and, you know, and add value to the business. But I think really focusing on how you can help the employee get to the next level, or like hit their career goals or their objectives or whatever they want to go after by working at your company is incredibly important. I think that's how you retain people too.
Yeah. It's crazy when you talk to people and you're like, oh, like, you know, what are your personal goals? And they don't have them set. And it's tough to like reverse engineer what they're doing at the company then. Because
Right.
you feel like there's such a disconnect if they're not fueling their like personal growth.
Right. 100%. And you want to like you again, you have to balance it with like, what are the needs of the business and what is their skill set? But at the same time, you're trying to help push them and guide them towards their own personal career goals, and knowing that they're putting in a lot of like hard-earned time for you. So you should be doing the same for them.
That's great. I want to shift to your like investor hat. So I know as part of your consulting exposure, like you said, you know, took some of those profits, flipped them back in, and then became an angel investor in some of these companies. What was your strategy to like picking which companies you invested in? Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, I'd say most of the time in the beginning when I was making the investments, the benefit I had was because I was consulting for these companies, I was really involved in the day-to-day. And so I could see if something was working or not working. I probably had a sense of like, okay, is there another investor that's going to, like, if they need more capital, come in behind and back them? I was never cutting a large check because I was an angel investor. So I was able to slide in these rounds. And so I was de-risked a little bit by knowing I wasn't leading the round at the time, and I was sort of coming in, you know, and following along on the investment. But it, you know, that was for early on when I was super involved. But, you know, as I started to, you know, just invest in other companies that I may not necessarily have been as actively involved, it always comes down to the founders, right? And just like really, it comes down to the people. I can't, and I know you probably hear this from a lot of people, it really comes down to the founders. And do you think this founder that has this big vision can actually execute on the vision they're saying, stay focused, get the operations right? Because a lot of this comes down, it all comes down to execution. Like, it's literally all in the execution. Ideas are a dime a dozen. Everyone's got their next big vision. But the reality is you just have to execute. I tend to gravitate towards things that I feel like I can help add value to from just my relationships. And I want to make sure I can like plug and play some value for these companies. And I think even more so now, I like to see businesses that really understand how, you know, managing a company and managing people works and running a business efficiently, because otherwise they're going to go out of business because they're going to run out of money.
So if you look back on your batting average, like in retrospect, I know you've had some hits, you probably had some misses as well. If you look at those, what do you think it was about the hits when you read the situation at that time that like made it? Was it like an instant, this is it, or you were kind of lukewarm? And on the misses, you know, vice versa.
I'd say on the hits, I was 70% in early stage investing, which is what I do a lot of. So it's usually like late seed, maybe Series A. You're going off of limited data. And so I was probably 70% like operating a little bit instinctual around like, do I feel like this founder can take it there? I did my research. Is the market big enough? Whatever. And then like 30% grounded in reality and financials and just like digging into due diligence. And so it's pretty heavily weighted, based on your gut instinct of this is going to work or not. And obviously that split chain, it flip flops the later stage you go, right? Like when there's a lot more data, but early on that was it. And it just really came down to it really comes down to the founders. And I think on the ones that I missed on, I think I didn't spend enough time with the founders to really get to know, kind of vet them. And this it isn't always the case. I don't want to, like, sometimes there's unforeseen circumstances that happen, that a business may just not work. But the hits are definitely driven primarily by the team and the founders.
Were there any companies that you passed on investing in that you wish you would have? Like, what were those and what was the stage?
Masterclass I passed on. I met the founder, David, when they were like 3 or 4 people. I thought the valuation was too high at the time because they didn't have any classes out. I actually ended up connecting my friend who has now run all the celebrity partnerships for Masterclass for the 5 years.
Yeah.
and so, but at the time, I passed, and I just felt the valuation was too high relative to the business. Obviously, they really, have executed well. They built out an amazing business, and you're not gonna make everything. There's another one I missed on, and it wasn't because I didn't want to get in. I was like a week too late. I missed out on Figs, which was essentially, they basically like took fashion and plugged it into the nurses and doctors' medical apparel.
Yeah.
And
I've seen the ads for that.
Oh man, this was so early. I was literally like a week late from the round closing. I tried to do everything I could to get in that round, and it was just like closed and I couldn't get in. And so it was just a matter of me being like literally a week late. I would have 100% done it. And I like really saw the long-term potential of the business. I just missed it from a timing perspective. And then there's been definitely like other ones along the way. And, there were some times where I didn't have unlimited capital to invest here. So I also just had to be I kind of had to like pick and choose what I was investing in. And so if there was a larger pool of capital there years ago, then I think I probably would have pulled the trigger on a lot more things than I passed on.
Yeah. The interesting thing with angel investing is like, I feel like it's all about deal flow. Well, it's all about the capital you have, but then deal flow. Like there's a lot of people that I talk to that, everybody claims to be a Monday morning investor or whatever, but they have no access to deal flow. So they don't see any of these. So I think you were in a unique spot where you were.
I had the opposite issue. I had crazy amounts of deal flow, and there wasn't enough capital at the time to go around. I was like building my business, and you can get caught up cutting 25 or 50K checks real quick and be like, where'd all my money go, right? So I was fortunate because the approach I took from angel investing was differentiating myself through bringing a unique value that other investors didn't have. So I looked at it as like, okay, all these investors up in Silicon Valley, they're all competing over the same thing. I'm bringing different relationships, and there's very few entertainment investors. It's kind of like similar to what you mentioned about athletes, right? Every tech company in the world will always let the athlete in or always let the celebrity in. So I was like, okay, what's my point of differentiation? I'm not a celebrity, obviously, but I had
you're the conduit for the celebrities,
right? I was the conduit to these relationships in a space that they could drive value through, and so that was the way that I, got in a lot of these rounds and got sent a lot of deal flow.
Do you find now with all the 3 businesses you're operating, you're less active on the investing, or are you still taking meetings?
Yeah, I'm much less active. I've put in a lot of my personal capital into, these businesses, and I just don't have the time right now to be, to do the necessary due diligence, meet with the founders, and I want to make sure I add value. So, look, there might be a few investments over the course of the next year that are just like things that I think are great opportunities, and I just really vibe. But majority of my effort is focused on the day-to-day and of operating the brands and the company.
So you seem like the kind of guy who would have a lot of mentors as well, like a lot of connections for mentorship. What's one of the best pieces of advice you've gotten from a mentor along the way?
Yeah. So it's actually interesting because I see how you're saying that, but I didn't have like one or two or three like mentors that I went to all the time. I think it was a collection of me being constantly curious and going and talking to everyone and pulling bits and pieces from lots of different people. Because I think even when you have a mentor, right, they're not always right, and they're not always making the right decision for you because they don't have full context around you or your business or you're at a certain point in time. They have context based on what they've built in their career, but it's not like you can take 100% of what they say and just follow whatever they say. And so I think I did a lot of active listening and asking questions and being constantly curious with lots of people and taking the best from a lot of really smart people I met along the way, and then using all of that collectively to make decision making that was grounded in all these things I learned from everyone.
Yeah, and targeted for you.
Yeah, and targeted for me. And so I kind of tailored all the things I learned and I asked to really smart people to be targeted to my situation because everyone's situation is different.
That's a good point. I feel like most people will assemble like a 5 to 10 person like mentorship advisory board, but they have no context or idea. And to be honest, even if they give you a couple hours a week, they're not spending the rest of the hours thinking about your context or your problem. So you
Totally.
kind of have to take what they say with a grain of salt.
And look, like I know, look, I know a lot of really successful people, billionaires, whatever, right? And even though they were really smart at what they did, they probably don't have like to your point, they don't have all of the context around the things that I'm going through now. I may pull some really amazing like nuggets of information out of what they're saying that I'm like, wow, that's really smart. Like I wasn't thinking about it that way. Conceptually, how you're thinking, you built your company. I can pull that information from you and apply it back to me. But a lot of it's not going to actually be applicable, even though they were incredibly successful and incredibly smart.
Totally. A kind of yin and yang question. So the first one's like, can you recall a story or experience in the last couple of years with the three brand across any of the brands? It was like your most frustrating moment as a founder. And then the flip side, your most validating moment where you step back and we're like, wow, like I can't believe, we're here right now.
Yeah, most interesting, most frustrating moment. I think like the self-funding piece is really tough. So like the way when you're building these brands, right? Even if you're building cash flow positive, the quicker you scale, the more inventory you need, right? But you're in a unique spot in that your brands can't get, and early on a brand, because they don't have enough history, can't go get a bank loan, right? So you have to spend a lot of time finding debt financing, convincing people to give you, debt financing. And one of the frustrating things I saw is that in a weird way, right? Because financing debt is centered around how can a debt holder protect their interest, and they're much more likely to finance someone who has raised capital and finance it against the capital that the brand is raised and in the bank via venture debt or whatever, than finance someone that is self-fund. I'm like, hey guys, I'm building a real business that's profitable. Holy shit, that's like unheard of today,
Yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
you're building a profitable business. But it's actually really hard early on to find the free capital to scale the inventory when you're responsibly growing, but growing really, really quickly. And so that was like a little frustrating, and it is what it is. I think like that's the choice, myself and my partners on each of the brands we made by self-funding it. But it is a little frustrating that there are solutions that are popping up to like facilitate the unique needs that e-commerce brands have, but I don't think it's fully there yet. So that was a little frustrating. The wins are, I mean, man, there's been like, I feel like startups are roller coasters. It's like up, down, up, down, up, down. So you gotta like really celebrate the wins a little bit. So whether that was like the first million in sales for the brand, or whether that was like we hit 100,000 followers on Instagram, or even seeing like like the Facebook communities that have been built of like these Facebook groups that are like, seeing how all of the customers like talk to each other, they bonded over the product. There's like a real community build and that wasn't like a one-time moment, but just seeing like pops of that is like really, really cool and fun to see. And it's awesome to build something that people want to buy, right? And in theory, a lot of people can do that on a small level if you convince someone to buy something from you or get a couple friends to buy something. But it's really hard to convince a lot of people to buy something from you because they bought into the brand at scale. And so for me, that's the most fun part of building the brands.
That community, like that feedback loop, like I bet that would just feel so good to like build that community, like see people positively reacting, interact with them like that.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. And again, even though I don't use the products a lot of times, I still like I really enjoy that community aspect of it.
So an interesting one for you here, and I, because you've had so many like phases, I would love to get your take on this in each of those. If you could teleport back to the first few months when you were starting, and let's say we break it up in like first few months of the consulting for the startups, first few months of adding the talent piece, first few months of these brand builds, what would you tell yourself?
I think you got to go with your gut, right? I'm a big believer in like going with my gut and my instinct. And the times I didn't, I feel like those were the times that I may have made a mistake or like just missed out on an opportunity that I didn't go after. And so for me, it's again, I think you need to be grounded in reality. I think people need to be optimistic realists. So like on one end, like don't be a dreamer that just lives in dreamland all day. And then on the other end, don't be so stuck in what cannot be that you can't see what can be. And so be an optimistic realist that like you kind of see where you're going with everything, but it's grounded in reality. And then like I just wish I would trust my gut more. And the older I get, the more like the stronger that gets for me.
Yeah, that's great. Are there any brands or companies that you look up to, either as a, you know, as you mentioned, like a corollary to the business you're building now that you use for inspiration, or just like personally brands that you really like?
I don't think there's like any one brand that I'm like enamored with. It's kind of like mentors. I take bits and pieces from lots of different brands. And one thing that's benefited me a lot is like building out a network of other entrepreneurs that I think have awesome brands that I can chat with and like figure out, see what they're doing well, see what they're going through, see how I can help them. Like a couple weeks ago, I was with my friend Dylan, who's the founder of Brewmate, which is they make like koozies and drinkware, and like they've exploded. And we're sitting there and comparing, you know, different things that they're doing well and that we're doing well. Or I'm speaking with other founders in the beauty space and seeing like what's working well for them. So there's not, again, for me, it's not like one. There's not like I think people might say like it's Nike or it's whatever. I don't have
it's a collection.
I don't have one brand that I like aspire to be. It's I want to be the best brand we can be, and I'm gonna like take inspiration from lots of brands to make it the right fit for us.
So learning and resources. If people hear this and they want to learn more, are there any books, newsletters, YouTube channels, podcasts, or like influencers that you follow that you'd recommend checking out, either for like building a business or just, influencer marketing or anything that you're into?
Sure. So all of YouTube, whatever you want to learn, you can learn it on YouTube. So I'm just an avid YouTuber where if there's anything I want to learn, I'm diving in. If I'm like, how can I optimize our email funnels? Like I'm going on YouTube to watch a bunch of email optimization, funnel targeting videos, right? I think one podcast I really love, it's called Group Chat. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's my friend D Murthy, and Anand, his brother, and this guy Drama. They have a company called 5-4 Clothing. They have a ton of stuff in the apparel space. They've done a great job of like, it's a daily podcast Monday through Friday. They cover everything like tech, business, pop culture, startups, music. Like it's a great mix of everything. And so I kind of get my daily dose of news from those guys, and they're awesome. But I can't stress enough that you can literally learn anything you want for the most part on YouTube. And that's what I tell everyone. I'm like, they're like, I don't know how to do it. I'm like, great, go look it up on YouTube.
YouTube University. If you spent 1 year on YouTube, you could learn as much as you spent probably.
Yeah, if you spent 1 year on YouTube University and 2 years inside, a startup,
yeah, you could do anything.
And you're on the way.
Yeah, that's great. All right, so final 2 questions for you. So we ask these to every guest. So the first one is the startup manifesto. If you had to write a startup manifesto with 5 of the most important key lessons or pitfalls to avoid when starting out, what would they be?
Yeah, so I think the first one would be to make sure that you're really in it for the right reasons, right? Like building a startup is a grind. It is going to be a massive commitment of your life. There's no work-life balance. So make sure going into it that you actually really want to build a business, that you're not just doing it because it's sort of been this like, glorified thing to do to like be an entrepreneur. Like you got to know you have to be in this for the long haul. There's going to be a lot of bumps in the road. You also need to be like mentally prepared to go into a startup. You have to have such a strong mental willpower because of all the ups and downs. And it sometimes feels like there's a lot more downs than ups, and like the roller coaster of emotions that an entrepreneur goes through. Make sure you're actually willing to do that, because that's really tough. I'd say the next thing is like in the beginning of the business, it's like the whole ethos of like no task is too small, right? Like you need to be willing to do anything and everything. Like the when like insert name here launched, right? Like the first brand, I was doing, I was DMing customers for customer service. I was DMing customers to try to get customers, just doing literally anything and everything the brand needs. And like no task should be below you as a founder. I'd say the next piece is kind of goes back to just like having an extreme focus and attention to detail on the business. I think a lot of startups, they, as and speaking as like one startup as an individual brand, they get really distracted by all the different ways they can expand the business. And then they end up expanding to do so many things that they don't do what their core offering is actually right. And it just really, hurts the business long term, because they didn't apply an extreme focus to like building scale and, the market around their core offering, and they just expanded too quickly. I think the next thing is cash flow is like king or queen or whatever you want to call it, right? Like you need to really know your numbers. I think personally as a founder, you should be hyper involved on the finance side and actually understand it and know that, look, whether you're self-funding, not self-funding, raising money, you're using someone's capital, whether it's yours or someone else's. You better treat that capital the right way, put it to good use, really manage cash flow, because cash flow is the lifeblood of the business. And like when Corona hit, right, if you weren't managing your cash flow correctly, it's really hard to self-correct, course correct in a quick amount of time. And I think that's a perfect example of it. And then I think the last piece I would say is like have a hyper obsession over your customer and the customer experience. And that flows through from one, making sure you're producing a really high quality product that people want to buy. That flows through to, your customer service team, the way you operate your customer service team, how you speak to your customers, how do you talk to them online, making sure if people are commenting on your page, you're coming back to them. And, like really focusing on the community, because that, again, like you don't have a business without your customers. And I think that's like super key,
Yeah, that's great. And the last one is the nomination, which we ask kind of everyone on the show as well. So it's your turn to nominate another founder that's a friend, colleague, or mentor of yours that you'd like to see on the show in the future.
Sure. So I think I'd nominate my friend CJ McDonald, who he's the founder of a company called Step. So previously I actually met CJ. He was actually one of the first companies I signed up on the agency side like years ago. He had a startup at the time called Gift, GYFT. It was a digital gift card app that like allowed you to send and buy and sell gift cards digitally. Ended up having a really super successful exit to First Data, the big payment processing company, 6 or 7 years ago. So he 2 years ago came back and is now building another company in the financial services space called Step. It's just step.com. They're basically like a financial bank, like a banking solution for teenagers and Gen Z. Like I think like all the cards in the space today for Gen Z just like aren't frankly that cool. They're like, it's just like not like a functional product that Gen Z would actually use. He's a great guy, successful entrepreneur, sold his last company. I actually I invested in Step. Obviously, I would back. There's some people that you would back anything they're doing. He's one of those people or entrepreneurs that I would back. I would write a blank check and back anything he does. And so I think he'd be a great person to have on the podcast.
Yeah, that's great. We'll get him on. Thank you for that. Before we wrap, I just want to acknowledge you. What's really inspiring is a few things, your focus, and your curiosity you mentioned. I think the balance that you've had to grow 3 brands and have kind of the Kombo Venture umbrella is so difficult. And after talking to you, it's inspiring to see, how laser focused you are and the balance that you have to do all those things that you like to do. So I really appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to kind of being an advocate for all of your brands and continuing to support as you grow.
Yeah, thanks, man. I had a blast doing this. It was a lot of fun, and it was good to chop it up.
Awesome. Thanks, man. Last thing, just for people who hear this and want to connect with any of the brands, you want to plug the social or websites of any of them?
Sure. insert name here is just at insert name here.
Easy
Fun,
enough.
by the way, funny story. When we, when we first started out, when we had some packaging coming in, when we labeled it through customs, it got stuck because the customs thought, oh, it's insert name here. They forgot to put the company name.
Yeah. Where'd the name come from? I meant to ask you that.
We had like a brainstorming session one night, and Jordan, my partner, kind of threw it out, and the whole name came from the idea that like, someone that's wearing hair can transform to be like whoever they want to be. Okay. So hence like insert name here. But it was just funny how we had some like early issues with customs because
that's hilarious.
It looked like it was a mislabel. But that's insert name here. Glamnetic, which is the lash brand, it's just at Glamnetic. Waycart's at Waycart. My personal Instagram, I wish I was actually posting more, but I'm just super busy running the brands. But it's just at Kevin G. And then, my website's just komboventures.com. And feel free to add me on LinkedIn, shoot me a DM on Instagram. I'm try to be pretty responsive.
Awesome. Kevin Gould, founder of Kombo Ventures. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to that episode with Kevin Gould of Kombo Ventures, the parent venture company of Glamnetic, Waycart, and insert name here. Remember, if you liked what you heard and want to support the show, there's a couple quick things you could do that would really help us out. These should take about 2 minutes in total, but I cannot tell you how important they are for the show's growth. 1. Subscribe to our show on Apple Podcasts, as well as leaving a 5-star rating and a couple-sentence positive review on why the show inspired you. These ratings and reviews are super important. They might not seem like a lot, but they do signal to Apple that they should put our show in front of other people that might like it. 2. Follow us on social, mainly Instagram, at Founder Podcast. Each week we put out teasers, audio clips, and important quotes from the episode. And lastly, check out our website as a mission control for the show. Go to thefounderpod.com. We have a page on there called Special Offers where we link up discount codes from our founders' companies, as well as all the books and resources that have been recommended across our episodes. I hope you enjoyed that episode and are looking forward to the next one. Until then, I'm Kallaway, and this is The Founder.